Hey, what's up guys? It's Marf and welcome back to another video. Today I wanted to talk about the Looper Pre. Now, this was quite an interesting game mode in theory because essentially how Gameloft talked about it was you'd play the Grand Prix like normal, but instead of racing another person's ghost, you'd actually be racing your own ghost. And your ghost would have slipstream so that every time you play, you'd actually be able to get a faster time because you could ride the slipstream of your previous ghost. So let me just quickly explain how it works in case you aren't familiar with it. Now, I kind of explained the basics of it, but essentially when you play against yourself, your ghost actually starts around half a second in front of you so that you actually have a chance to ride the slipstream of your ghost. And what happens is if you really try your best, pretty much for the first couple of races you play against yourself, you can improve your time by almost about a second or so, or around half a second depending on how much you play. But of course, as you keep playing, the diminishing returns effect starts to come in where it gets harder and harder and harder to beat your own ghost, or even to keep up with your own ghost, because again, that ghost will start half a second in front of you. So if you keep playing for 10 or 20 tries, it might be hard to even improve your time, at least in a noticeable amount. So it's quite an interesting thing in concept because instead of, again, playing in a normal Grand Prix where you're racing against the ghost of another player, you're just playing against yourself, trying to get the best time as possible with the slipstream. Now, when I first tried the game mode a couple of days ago for the qualification rounds for the Grand Prix, I was actually having a bit of fun because I was like, wow, this is kind of interesting and new, and that ghost is mine, not someone else's, so I'm sort of racing against myself. But then it quickly became apparent I am just kind of racing against myself, and I am all by myself, and I'm just going to play the same race over and over and over again to try and get the best time. And then it quickly just sort of fizzled out in terms of my excitement because it didn't really mean much to me in order to just play against myself over and over again. And really the only motivation, it quickly became apparent that it was just getting the key for the car. There wasn't any motivation to get the best time as possible. It was really to just beat my opponent's time and just scrape by in order to get the key for the car, kind of like other Grand Prix or the Epic Pre's or, those types of formats. So in terms of the pre sort of word, I guess the format works the same. Of course, you're grouped into different tiers of performance for players, and at the end of, I think it still is 7 rounds, you'll get the rewards, and of course there is a key for the new Airish car. But this led me to think about how Gameloft called this a new mode, and of course I related it back to the nitro pollution thing where they had, I believe, a couple of different events in the daily event section, and then we just kind of never heard about it again. But you would have heard about it previously because some advertisements were actually using that game mode for a daily event, so it was kind of already in the game. This is kind of completely new in the sense that, of course, we've had Slipstream pretty much for, I think, a couple of years at this point, but of course you were never put against yourself where your ghost was half a second ahead of you and your goal was to get as best of time as possible just racing against yourself over and over again. But of course, like I said, we've had Slipstream before and we've had Grand Prix before, so this isn't really a new mode. This is more or less just a mashup of 2 different modes in a new way. And again, when I was playing it for the first time, I was kind of excited. Like, this was quite a different experience compared to some of the other things. But after those first couple of races, it really was just the same thing over and over again. And so I wanted to talk about, again, how they're making it seem like this is a new mode, but it isn't really a new mode because fundamentally, the way you play Asphalt 9 in the Looper Pre mode is not any different than how you've played the game in previous modes, especially Slipstream, because that is really what it is. It's really just playing Slipstream against one other person, but that person just happens to be you, maybe 3 minutes before you've played this race. So in my opinion, it quickly lost the excitement after a couple of races, and that was kind of disappointing because I thought there was maybe going to be something else, maybe a little spark here and there that would have had me being more excited about this or having more fun. But ultimately, it just led me to realize that, yeah, I'm just kind of playing against myself over and over again. And so I wanted to talk about how Asphalt 9 could really shake things up and what a new mode might look like because again, when I think of a mode, I think of fundamentally changing how I play the game. And so just as an example, if we go back to previous Asphalt games, I like to look at the difference between a classic race in Asphalt 6 versus the beat 'em all events in Asphalt 6, where one is obviously the classic game mode we all know and love. You race around a track 1 or 2 laps, you use nitro, you drift, all that sort of fun stuff, and you try to get first place. That's pretty much what it's like now in almost every race in Asphalt 9. Whereas the beat 'em all event, the goal is to get as many knockdowns as you can. And so instead of focusing on how you can get ahead of everyone else, you're focusing on 2 things. Number 1 is knocking down as many people as possible, but also you're focused on not wrecking or not being knocked down yourself, because I believe if you got knocked down a certain amount of times, you might either lose the event or you just wouldn't get a certain reward. I can't remember off the top of my head. But those 2 different things fundamentally changed how you played, because now instead of worrying about being in first place, you're worried about knocking down as many people as possible, which means you're using your nitro differently, you're drifting differently, you're going around the track differently than you would have before. Whereas in Asphalt 9, most of, or if not pretty much all of these different game modes is still just trying to get around the track as fast as possible. So here's a bit of an idea, and I think I've said this before, but just to reiterate, I think something really cool would involve giving the cars a health bar, and so having 360s wouldn't instantaneously knock you down, but it would deal a certain amount of damage. And as for nitro, you could kind of use that as your health bar, and or you could use nitro that you have in order to replenish a certain amount of health. Now in terms of your objective, maybe the goal still is to come into first place. But let's say you give the players 2 or 3 laps, and so the races are now maybe 3 or 5 minutes long, and so what happens is you have players who actually want to go for knockdowns, and instead of, just instantaneously being wrecked and then you are basically guaranteed to lose the race, you now have an incentive to sort of dodge and weave and try to manage where your opponents are, because sure, maybe you get 360'd, but that just means losing a bit of health. So you don't have to play super safe, or maybe you just want to be aggressive and try to knock other people down, but of course you have to look out for them doing the same to you. So I think a game mode like this, where you give the cars a certain amount of health, the 360s are no longer a instantaneous knockdown, and the nitro now serves a purpose other than just getting you to go faster, introduces a lot of different elements that can be used differently by players in order to achieve whatever objective it is that the race wants you to achieve. So maybe it is knock as many players down as possible within a certain amount of time, and you just race in a loop over and over and over again, but maybe after 5 minutes or something, the player with the most knockdowns wins. Or maybe the goal is last one standing wins, because again, if you can use your health or use your nitro to replenish your health, you can sort of have this thing where it might be a free-for-all where last person standing wins. So I think something like that could make the game play so much differently than it is now. And it is kind of interesting that Gameloft hasn't introduced something like this, where it fundamentally changes the way you play Asphalt 9, because not only would you be able to introduce new daily events, new forms of something like the Grand Prix, you would also be able to do tons of new things in multiplayer and the career, whereas something like the LOOPER PRIX can only really be used in that specific context, and something like Nitro Pollution is just sort of a modifier to the normal game we already know and love. So in my opinion, I think we really need a radically new game mode in order to shake up how things are played in Asphalt 9, and that was just kind of an idea, where again, the car has a specific amount of health, and 360s don't instantaneously knock you down, and you can use nitro or get pickups on the track, for example, in order to replenish that health. But of course, let me know your thoughts on the new LOOPER PRIX in the comment section down below. And of course, give me your suggestions for new modes you'd like to see in Asphalt 9. I've heard a lot of people talk about how they'd love to see something like the knockdown mode, but also something like Infected from Asphalt 8 and Asphalt Extreme come back to Asphalt 9. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys later.